Chapter 8. There was an inexplicable amount of dust everywhere. The Great Gatsby. In this video, I want to talk about the Roaring Twenties. And will Russia usher the next Roaring Twenties? My name is Mark Bernard, and I'm a monetary economist. Now, it's an idea that economic waves go in cycles. Some people say there are sunspot cycles. Some people say there are economic cycles tied to numbers. And if you look at the 100-year cycle, it corresponds with the Napoleonic cycle of the Napoleonic Wars. And then there was inflation, and then there was a crash. And then that was like the Napoleonic Wars in the lower digits of the 1800s, the 1820s, and then the 1830s, there was severe depression or economic, at least, upheaval. What happened in the 1900s? 1900s is almost something I can reach out and touch. I mean, I had 4 grandparents born in the 1800s, and my parents come from the 1920s and 30s they came from. So I have, as an economist and a monetary economist, have a particular interest in this time period. If I could teleport back, maybe this might be the time I would look at, just to observe the Roaring Twenties. 1914, World War I started. And after that, you had scarcity driving inflation. And then you had the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression. In our time, Russia, despotic imperial Russia, the aggressor, the invaders, started 2014, this next cycle, with the annexation of Crimea, illegal annexation of Crimea. And we're already into the 20s. And one might say, in Russia, everything looks okay. Everything looks glittery. You know, I play chess online a lot, probably too much. And I chat with some of these Russian guys flying the flag, and I'm asking them, you can fly the blue-white flag instead of the blue-white-red flag. But they choose to fly the blue-white-red flag. And I ask them economically how things are going. They never say fantastic or great. They say, not that bad, ... which means they sense it and they feel it. And these are chess players. They're just, telling it like it is. They sense and they feel that something might be coming. So this quote by the Great Gatsby, and it's a wonderful book. I highly recommend you read it. We read a lot of these types of books when I went to prep school in New England, because that was kind of like in vogue at the time. And then these type of era books are forgotten. But the Great Gatsby is a tale of everything is glitter, but there's dust everywhere behind the scenes. What is bubbling up? And let's talk about economic theory and how that might give some explanation for it. Is this the next Roaring Twenties that we're ushering in, and what comes next? Now, again, I don't believe necessarily in these numeric cycles, because just by coincidence, 100-year cycles, or maybe it isn't a coincidence. I bet if I go back to the 1700s, I could find an argument there. Maybe it could fit the model. But since we have 10 fingers, we're on a base 10 system, and 10 times 10 is 100. It's a coincidental thing. Probably a better mathematical system might be a base 8 system, but we have 10 fingers, so we're on that. So my point being that it doesn't make any kind of great sense, unless it's a metaphysical sense, that there's a 100-year economic cycle. Some people tie it to economic sunspots, etc., or weather cycles. But it is interesting to look at. In each case, in the Napoleonic case, and then the 20s and the 30s, in the 1900s, the Great War, and then it's funny how they call it the Great War, the Roaring Twenties and the Great Depression, and in our time. Let's look at what David Davidson, he was basically from the Stockholm School of Economics, but he was a footnote in history. But he was a brilliant economic writer. He actually set up the Economic Journal and wrote other greats like Knut Wicksell in it and discussed things of monetary and real importance. His argument was that economic growth and these cycles, even Wicksell said that cycles are caused by real phenomena, not monetary phenomena, unlike the Austrians, is connected to productivity. Productivity is nothing more than, with human ingenuity and creativity, you can create more supply, at a total cost being lower. It shifts the supply curve. The supply curve, supply to the sky, demand down. and it shifts it so that there's greater aggregate quantity and less cost, less price for this. And that's all done with human ingenuity, and that's called productivity. And what is significant about this in relation to Russia and maybe Russia, even Ukraine, and the geopolitics of today is it seems like all is glitter around us, but the actuality of the Russian economy and our world economies it's probably dust and going to turn to dust and ashes to ashes, and dust shall it return, right? We shall return too. David Davidson said that the inflation of the 20s was muted by monetary expansion. That means under a normal economic system of growing economies and growing productivity, we should have a deflationary drift because the supply curve with productivity and innovation brings on greater quantity, less cost. And this should create deflation. The reason we have either steady prices or mild inflation is because monetary expansion eats up that normal healthy deflation. If you understand the theory behind it, that was David Davidson's argument. That was F.A. Hayek's argument. That was Robinson's argument to counter Keynes. So that was the phenomena that explained it, where everybody thought, like Great Gatsby in the Roaring Twenties, I believe Daisy and Tom or Nick, in the Roaring Twenties, everything was fine. Everything looked okay. And people in Russia are saying the economy is okay, not that bad. Or they may look to the example and not the rule. People look to the example of some IT worker in Moscow working in the defense industry and not the rule that there's no plumbing in the countryside in like 66% of the countryside, or what we call plumbing. Because behind the glitter are ashes. And it's also symbolic in The Great Gatsby, if you read the book, about this moral decay. Is that what is happening today, either in the United States or in Russia? This moral decay behind the glitter and the chasing of money and resources? When my claim as an economist and somebody who's a scholar of wealth of nations, it's not connected to the resources. I mean, plenty of countries from Congo to Venezuela to Brazil to Russia who have plenty of resources, but they're not too wealthy generally. The aggregate population is connected to this creativity and productivity index. So you might say, oh, the Russians don't need this creativity and productivity because they can just pump this Texas tea, this black gold out of the ground in Siberia and ship it to China, and the Chinese will do that for us. They'll create the capital goods. And one of David Davidson's arguments was he had something called the scarcity index. The scarcity index was showing you that inflation and this bubble that's about to occur and then collapse was manifest by the scarcity index. That things that Russia might be experiencing, they're definitely experiencing food because you can't get this large variety of food, automotive, electronics, aerospace, microelectronics, etc., shortages, and that's starting to ripple through the capital sector. All the capital goods coming from China, paid by the price of this oil, is not used for a productive sector in Russia. It's used for a destructive sector. So again, the argument, we'll call it a simple argument or the simpleton argument is, oh, Russia can just pump oil, the Chinese give them capital goods, and that goes on forever. Does it really? Nothing goes on forever. That sounds to me like a model for disaster, because if the capital goods, the resources that they're using, the money and productive resources they're using is not going into creating capital for home industries like machine tool parts, capital lengthening, and anything that would create value besides destruction, that total wealth will go down. And eventually it will have an effect throughout the whole world. Have like, I call it the butterfly effect. And that's what happened, especially with these tariffs in the 1930s. When one economy starts to ripple, China, what are they going to do? I mean, my economist in college, he was telling us, this to counter the mercantilists, when one country accumulates just, let's say, gold, the bullionists, they accumulate gold while they're exporting all their capital goods. one country has capital goods and the other people just sit on these gold bars. What are they going to do with it? And you say, well, you can buy something. But because of the species flow mechanism in economics, it's another term, it all kind of works its way out where the people just sitting on gold, they better be reinvesting that in productive capital in a community of countries, or else that economy goes down. I don't mean to go in these tangential paths, but I'm trying to explain it in the simplest terms of the interconnectedness of these economies around the world. And the bottom line is you just can't produce destructive goods for Russia and Russia just pump oil. That, again, is another example of somebody trying to lift themselves up, two economies trying to lift themselves up by their own bootstraps. You have to create something that shifts the supply curve in a productive way, something that makes a better mousetrap that will be universal for humanity, whether it's, some universal energy or solar power or windmills or something that's going to benefit mankind as a whole to liberate these minds and make the world a better place. So more creative brains come online. We have more creative thinking, and that's anti-Malthus, Thomas Malthus, who had these Malthusian, we call it, predictions that the world is just going to get worse and worse. It can't be sustained unless humans, the wealth of nations, Adam Smith, trade and add and value added to this capital contribution. And that's what is not happening in Russia. So my claim is this very well could be the Roaring Twenties. All looks like glitter. All looks like gold, but all that's gold is not glitter, and all that is glitter is not gold. All right? Ashes, inexplicable amount of ashes behind this golden glitter. If you think, I'm the guy who took all his money out of the stock market last month, and I'm okay with that, right? If you think, like everybody does, whether the .com or 2008, or the Roaring Twenties of the 2000s, or the Roaring Twenties of the 1920s, or the Roaring, the 20s of the Napoleonic era, you think it's going to go on forever? I would pick up some history books of the history of economics, and I would take a deep look at these long-term economic cycles that seem to happen coincidentally on a 100-year cycle. And I would look at arguments of great thinkers like David Davidson, Knut Wicksell, F.A. Hayek, Mises, Ludwig von Mises, Robinson, and even maybe, dare I say it, Keynes, Lord John Maynard Keynes. Because in that century, as well as Bombovic, kind of got a cool name, Eugene Bombovic, right? And not to mention Adam Smith and, Ricardo. Because during that time, there was no social media. People were just thinking, and they were examining the world. And their message to us is it can't go on forever if you're creating weapons and you're not creating capital goods and machine tool parts and things that value added for all of humanity, because that's what makes the wealth of nations. So Russia, will it usher this World War III that they're creating, this from, the 1914 to the 2014 to the, 1814 cycle that they've initiated? Will that create the next collapse? It looks like it to me. My name is Mark Biernat. I'm a monetary economist. Have a beautiful day. Thank you very much.